This is Unrendered, and we're in stage 2, the second section. My guest, Dr. Timothy Harris from St. Kitts Nevis. Dr. Harris, let's move right into the second section, telling us about the crisis and the genesis of this crisis. Where, when, and how did it begin?
Well, this crisis basically, I would think, in the end, when historians take due note, would be recorded as a failure of leadership. And in particular, the autocratic, dictatorial approach to government and governance adopted by Denzel Douglas in the end brought us to where we are. I say that advisedly because I can recall that since the first term of the government, there was a need for special intervention, where we call them in our party circle retreats, where some of the critical players in the party saw a need to bring the party together to deal with what were emerging to be controversial issues and relationship problems which were being developed. And largely it grew out of a lack of appreciation. What was the role of the Prime Minister? How does a Prime Minister relate to ministers who are given constitutional duties by way of portfolios? What is the level of control that you can exercise when, according to tradition, it is the minister that is held accountable to cabinet and accountable to parliament? And in our Westminster constitutional model, the minister at the end of the day take responsibility and can be asked to resign over non-delivery or other atrocities occurring under his watch.
So you did that?
We did that. We had a number of retreats and basically they failed. By 2007, we had a special retreat, and this time the now Governor General, Sir Edmund Lawrence, was a member of a three-party team of interveners, for want of a better word, intermediaries. And that comprises also Simon Jones Hendrickson, a professor at the UVI, a Dr. Unrendered. These were all persons who were close to the party, one way or the other.
The Labour Party.
Labour Party had been providing intellectual support. And when they came and they did an analysis, and I have a copy of a document here marked Cabinet Retreat, because I believe this will feature so much. And they basically provided their intervention mechanism, and they outlined a number of things that were going wrong in the cabinet, from the allocation of portfolios, accountability to the electorate, the cabinet not functioning, the cabinet being used as a tool for rubber stamping of decisions that were being made elsewhere, the fact that the office of Deputy Prime Minister was not one which was respected or treated with respect, the fact that people felt marginalized, de-energized as a cabinet, and basically a litany of issues. But what is instructive was that they concluded in part that we had a dysfunctional cabinet. So way back in 2007, we were aware that the cabinet which Dr. Douglas was leading had become dysfunctional, and that we basically had a significant problem, a problem which, according to those who intervene, would degenerate into a crisis if the frustration, and I'm reading now, displeasure and extravagantly dissonant statements made by some members were not appropriately addressed. So in fact, we degenerated over time. And you ask yourself, why would a leader allow that? The fact is, he was profiting, as it were, from the status quo, and therefore he was not minded to move. His position.
Dr. Denzel Douglas is not here, and I can't ask him to respond to that. Why did you and your party or parties or interest groups not make a motion of no confidence in 2007?
Well, in 2007, by and large, we were actively attempting to work it out. These were internal mechanisms that had been brought to bear to deal with some of the problems which the party was having, and which by extension were impacting upon the government and the country. So, for example, way back in 2007, one of the issues that was tearing the cabinet apart and listed on page 2, first matter, public debt. St. Kitts and Nevis by 2010 had become, as it were, a pariah country with respect to fiscal management, that we had become not just one of the most indebted countries in the OECS on a per capita basis, but one of the most indebted countries in the world.
But you know, Dr.
And we had
Harris,
become a failed state, more or less, with respect to that.
with great respect, I have to say that I began by describing you as an actor. And I do not mean that in any pejorative way. You have quite an impressive resume, and I am sure that you are positive and well-meaning in your intent. But the history of our Caribbean politics has been that corruption by one political party or another. Whether you look at Jamaica, they have agencies now formed to work against the corruption. Trinidad, St. Vincent has been accused, St. Lucia, Dominica. There have been many myriad court cases doing the same thing. So in one sense, St. Kitts is not you know, the worst case scenario here, maybe from your own standpoint. But what I want, because when you look at it, Dr. Denzel Douglas has been Prime Minister for 19 years. Of those 19, you were 15?
A significant number, part of that.
Yes. So one might say, if you're pointing a finger, 3 are pointing back at you, might you not be part of that whole issue?
No, because anyone who understands how the government works know the reality.
What's that?
That at the end of the day, the Prime Minister called the shots. And for the majority of those years, in a democracy, well, you have heard your own Prime Minister. That has been one of his pet topics. The extent of prime ministerial authority is enormous. Everyone accepts that within the purview of the Constitution. Indeed, in the judgment, which perhaps we will get into, and the motion of no confidence, the judge himself was saying that having put the Prime Minister, the constitutions gave them very broad powers. So ultimately then, the buck stopped with them. He is stray, he is head of the government, head of the political party, and he therefore can render. For all practical purposes, we gave advice which he did not take. And this is what is documented in the cabinet retreat.
And in fact, right up to this moment, you are having the devil's job.
Yes.
Trying to even get a motion of the confidence.
You are right. You are right.
So what does this say about, because again, I go back to my acting metaphor.
Yes.
That this is just theatrical production, and that in the end, it is about individuals, 19, 20, 21, whatever the size of the particular parliament, having a production with one man having tremendous power. How can real change come about, and how does this lead to a new Caribbean, an ascendant Caribbean?
Yeah. Well, I think first of all, we have to accept what quality of life we would like to see, what we would like our leaders do. Ultimately, in politics, if there are consequences, leaders are willing to change the action. I do not agree with you that the yardstick by which we adjudge is that somebody is doing worse, whether in corruption or mismanagement. Certainly that will not be my style. Clearly, if we want to see improvement, we have to have a much more ennobling view of the politics.
To use Dr. Gonzalez as well.
I am using that advisedly because I'm on home turf, but an ennobling view of what it is we want in terms of the political dispensation. And my argument, rather than look at the least common denominator, that has been what has been so much wrong with leadership. It is always that somebody is worse than us, so accept mediocrity. I am saying,
I see your point.
Set a higher standard of excellence. So tell me about the best, and let me see if I'm not measuring up. I have an incentive, by and large, to get better, to improve my stock. And that would be a fundamental change, in my view. So instead of saying, well, not that St. Vincent is not poor, but Haiti is worse. Do you know what it's like in Haiti? Well, tell me of a much more improved society. and I know really the direction and the journey which I still have to go. I think that that would be a much more ennobling approach to the body politics. But for us, in particular, we have accepted that there are certain fundamental changes which we have to initiate. One of them is term limits, because again, the tenure of the Prime Minister in office, having regard to the so-called absolute power which he has, for which there is no countervailing checks in our Westminster model adopted from UK practice.
Would you advocate that those changes be made, that we have term limits?
I would. And we have, in fact, put those forward now as part of the new chapter of good governance and democracy for St. Kitts and Nevis, that we will stick to and pass the necessary legislation to effect a limit of 2 terms and the office holder of Prime Minister. This will not prohibit him from serving in other capacities, but it will allow him to go and to focus on the legacy and to focus on other substantive issues of succession planning, of what it is I would have done for my country, knowing that I don't have until eternity comes enabled to do that. And we are going to buttress that by other supporting legislation, Freedom of Information Act, integrity in public life. We don't have a functioning commission dealing with that. Those are the systems we are going to do and to initiate in St. Kitts to create an environment which is much more ennobling.
Dr. Timothy Harris,
yes.
With respect, again,
yes.
My point was not one of comparison to other countries that are more corrupt,
yes.
Or as corrupt, but to say that we exist in a political reality in the Caribbean. We are, as Dr. Gonzalez and others before him have said, we are civilization. You and I share something in common that the American does not share, because we have a particular culture and a civilization. And we know what obtains. We are existing in our political reality within a certain framework, within a certain culture and civilization. So I'm putting it to you that despite those amendations that you're going to make, those changes you're going to make, it is still within a certain framework. It's still within a divisive political reality within Parliament, and that the very situation you have today in St. Kitts Nevis, where a Prime Minister of 19 years as Prime Minister refuses to accept a vote of no confidence. What part of I have no confidence in you does a Prime Minister not understand, or a government not understand? But it's within a framework. So, there's nothing to really force him to go, because that is almost the culture. And I'm saying, do you see, as a possible future Prime Minister, do you see that point, that there's a need to change the essence of how we practice politics in the Caribbean?
Of course, I see that, and that is why we are putting forward something different. And in that regard, while not entirely novel, because Guyana has term limit for the office of the president, and Cuba belatedly has enjoined in that notion of term limits for very good reasons. And I will believe that you therefore have to make a start. It is not a perfect world, but we must nonetheless strive for perfection in terms of what we are going to do. And that is all the point we're making, that we are not going to accept mediocrity. We are going to say we have fallen short, we should have been there. This is what we need to do, because part of the problem is attitudinal. We're all people, but our attitude to life differ, our attitude to work differ to in other settings. Nonetheless, we want a better quality of life, and that is going to require a certain change, a certain mindset, a certain way of thinking. And part of the onus of leadership is to take the people on that journey, and which they must of necessity embark for their own good and for national good.
Tell me about your responses via your political parties. Explain to me, first of all, how is it that you are political leader of 2 parties? Or is it in fact 2 parties?
Well, let us put it that way. When the Honorable Sam Conde, who had served for about 17 years as Deputy Prime Minister, had left the government after I was terminated in January, we then decided that it would be good to form a political party.
You and Sam Conde?
Yes, yes.
As your website clearly shows.
Yes, People's Labour Party. People's Labour Party, because we still believe in the values and the principles of the Labour Party, the historical foundation on which it was built. Fighting for poor, fighting against injustice, empowering people, the social agenda and an economic agenda that, as it were, give credence to homegrown people.
In fact,
we still believe in those values.
You said that Dr. Douglas has moved the party away from the philosophical underpinnings of Labour and into something of his own construction and his own image.
Yes.
We will continue. This segment is up. We will continue that discussion when we come back. This is Unrendered. My guest is Dr. Timothy Harris from the Federation of St. Kitts Nevis, and when we come back, we will get straight into the crisis and what is unfolding as we speak in St. Kitts Nevis. I'm Chester Connell. This is Unrendered. We'll be right back.